We are in Joshua chapter 3. Don't get worried that it's the fourth week of a 24 chapter book and we're only in chapter 3. We're going to focus a great deal of the study probably on the first half or so of Joshua, and then there'll be some places where, as we make our way through the book, based on the material, that we'll cover some broader sections as we work our way through. So we might be a little bit behind, but we're not terribly behind, so we're okay. Last week we finished our study of Joshua chapter 2. For one of the few times when I teach, we have a nice clean cutoff, and so we get to start in Joshua chapter 3 this morning as we talk about the topic of not spying out Jericho. That was last week's. We get into crossing the Jordan River. So last week, we discussed Joshua sending out the two spies, their focus on the city of Jericho. They come in contact with Rahab. We learn about Rahab's faith. We learn about how Rahab then has a great role in the remainder of Scripture. Her faith is given as a great example. She ends up being in the lineage of King David and then eventually Jesus. And so a very interesting side story there as we study this portion of the preparation for the Israelites to enter into the promised land, into Canaan. So now we're ready to make that final move, the move that the Israelites have waited 40 years for, wandering in the wilderness in preparation for going across the Jordan into the land of Canaan. So Israel didn't wander all of this time to remain on the east side of the Jordan. God had brought them to the promised land, and he intended for this nation to inhabit that land. God declared this very clearly at the beginning of the book of Joshua. You'll remember in the second verse of our study, he said, "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give to them, to the Israelites." So the Israelites, we know that, we've just studied about the spies going to Jericho. They had sort of a more focused effort. We know that the Israelites know a lot about the land that they're about to inhabit already. Evidence of that came from the word back from the 12 spies, Joshua being one of those spies. If you want to flip over to Numbers chapter 13, we'll just read a little bit about this land. Numbers chapter 13, let's read verses 23 through 27. When they reached the valley of Eshcol, they cut off a branch bearing a single cluster of grapes, this being the 12 spies as they're going out to spy out the land. 2 of them carried it on a pole between them, along with some pomegranates and figs. That place was called the Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster of grapes the Israelites cut off there. At the end of 40 days, they returned from exploring the land. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. So, let's see, and there's one more verse there. Then they gave Moses this account. "We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit." So, that we always talk about the promised land as being the land that flows with milk and honey. And so, they're about to enter a very prosperous place. And so there had to be a lot of expectation from those people who had heard these stories from the 12 spies, but had never seen the land. Now, along with this, they know that there are some dangerous inhabitants of the land that need to be subdued. But right now, even a greater task is, how are we going to get into that land? Because the Jordan River stands in the way. And that is no small task for them to cover. So they had some challenging questions that they had to answer here individually and collectively as a nation. How could an entire nation cross a flooded river? How could these wilderness wanderers. How could, they were going to need to change the way that they had lived. They had been wandering through the wilderness, many of them for their entire lives. I guess most of them, we would say, for their entire lives, because of that generation that had died off and the people who were going into the land. They're going to change their whole way of life. Now they're going to build fortified cities. They're not going to be wanderers anymore. And so, now also they were firmly behind Joshua, but now the rubber's about to meet the road, right? They're about to, go in and conquer these people. Can Joshua be the leader, the replacement for Moses that they really expect? When you study Scripture, a lot of times the things that you're doing every day help remind you of the things that you're studying. And on Friday night, Jonathan and I and some friends went to see the Atlanta Braves play. We went over to, that's the first time I'd been over to the new field over there in Atlanta. And when we left, it was late. It was like a 7:20 game. When we left, it was late. We stayed for the fireworks, so a lot of people had left already, but there were still a lot of people leaving at the same time. And when we bought these tickets, I bought these tickets online. At the end of it, they said, do you want a parking pass? And I thought, man, that's great. I want a parking pass, And so, clicked on that, got my parking pass in, Braves lot E35. And I had visions of, driving up and getting out of my car and walking into a gate there at the stadium. Well, parking lot E35 was somewhere about Villa Rica or so. I mean, it was a long way away from the stadium. And, I won't go into it in a lot of detail, but every step going to the stadium was uphill. So at least going back, every step was downhill, because it took about the fifth inning for my legs to stop burning. But on the way back, it was dark, a lot of people going at the same time. And I promise you, if I grabbed Jonathan once, I grabbed him 100 times, because we were in a crowd, it was dark, people just mixing in all together, and you're trying to hold on, and, it starts to help you think a little bit about the logistics of moving all of these people across the Jordan River, right? We were going through, it would squeeze into small areas, and we had a bridge where you went, where you walked across the interstate and stuff. And, so it's, just brought to mind as I was studying this, it's a great challenge. Now, as we see, when the Jordan River stops, there's going to be a broad area that they have. But we'll talk a little bit later in Numbers. If we're trying to sort of number the people of Israel right now that are trying to get across the Jordan, we're definitely in the millions, right? So there's a discussion in Numbers that numbers the men at about 600,000. And so if you think about the women and the children as well, now there's some women and children who are going to stay behind on the east side of the Jordan. So there's some number of people there. But, the whole group together probably numbered over 2 million. If you take some of those aside that are staying back on the east side of the Jordan, you're definitely still over 1 million people. This is a major undertaking, just like crossing the Red Sea was, to get these people where they needed to go. It's a major undertaking to get them anywhere, I would think, right? Just to get them to move camp. And so Joshua has a big task here in moving these people and now getting them across the Jordan. And so I want you to have in mind the size of this group, because in a little while we're going to talk about some things that I think play into thinking about some of the direction that was given and how it ties into this large group. So just keep that in your mind. So, all of these questions we talked about earlier, the answers to these questions really came in one powerful moment, and it's the one we're going to talk about this morning, where God holds back the flow of the Jordan River, and as if he was holding it with his hand. Cuts off those flooding rivers, and the Israelites were active in this event, but mostly just as spectators as they walked across and saw that water that was standing back there, or at least even if they couldn't see the water where it was held back, because it could have been miles away. We'll talk about that in a minute. They knew that they were in dry ground, and they were crossing a river that had just been at flood stage. So if you want to outline for Joshua chapter 3, I've tried to give you one for each one of the chapters so far. Verses 1 through 8, we'll call that preparation made. Verses 9 through 13 will be instruction given. And then verses 14 through 17, as we complete the chapter, will be the crossing. So let's study the text here of Joshua chapter 3. First of all, let's read the first 8 verses and talk about preparation made. Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and they set out from Shittim. And they came to the Jordan, he and all the people of Israel, and lodged there before they passed over. At the end of 3 days, the officers went through the camp and commanded the people, as soon as you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God being carried by the Levitical priest, then you shall set out from your place and follow it. Yet there shall be a distance between you and it, about 2,000 cubits in length. Do not come near it, in order that you may know the way that you shall go, for you have not passed this way before. Then Joshua said to the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. And Joshua said to the priests, take up the ark of the covenant and pass on before the people. So they took up the ark of the covenant and went before the people. The Lord said to Joshua, today I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. And as for you, command the priests who bear the ark of the covenant, when you come to the brink of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan. So Joshua modeled a lot of qualities of a great leader that we can learn about as we just analyze this chapter. Some of the qualities that we can mine out of these verses is he was dedicated to God. He was completely dedicated to God. He was consistently working to prepare the nation. We talked about this is a big job that he has, even here in this first step to cross the Jordan. And he was very good in the way that he communicated to the people. And all those things are beginning to show us the picture of Joshua as a great leader. So as we begin Joshua, remember Joshua chapter 3, remember that the people were at Acacia Grove, and now he moves them to the bank of the Jordan River. Verse 1 makes it clear that Joshua knew the plan of God for Israel to cross the Jordan and to enter into Canaan. So 3 days after they arrived at the Jordan, Joshua sent the officers throughout the camp to inform the people what was about to happen. Now that's another case where as you imagine what's going on here, you need to think about the number of people that were there, right? Sometimes we like to think about, maybe just me, but you sort of think about Joshua standing up somewhere and issuing a proclamation to the people of Israel. Well, there were 2 million of them, right? So that can't happen. And so there had to be a way to get the word out. And so that's what you would think about and see here as these officers go throughout the camp. He had to spread the word through lots of people to get out and let all the people know what they were about to do. So they told the people in verses 3 and 4, as soon as you see the ark of the covenant, your Lord being carried by the Levitical priest, then you shall set out from your place and follow it. Yet there shall be a distance between you and it, about 2,000 cubits in length. Do not come near it, in order that you may know the way you shall go, for you have not passed this way before. So what did the ark of the covenant represent? We've seen the ark before being discussed, and certainly it's very important in God's word, but what does it represent? God being with them, the presence of God. And it's not just symbolic either, is it? I mean, it is the presence of God. And so, when we think about all the situations where God has been present on earth, right? Him being near Moses, and Moses being able to see sort of the back as God passed by. And I mean, the presence of God is a powerful thing. Numbers 7, verse 89 describes God's presence in relation to the ark in this way. And when Moses went into the tent of meeting to speak with the Lord, he heard the voice speaking to him from above the mercy seat that was on the ark of the testimony from between the two cherubim, and it spoke to him. So don't think about this as just being symbolic. Think about God leading the people into the promised land. That's what's going on here with the ark being carried before. So, my question to you is, just for discussion purposes, is why do you think there was this space, these 2,000 cubits, that they said you move the ark out there in front of everyone, and everyone you keep a distance of this far? What would be some of the reasons that might be necessary, might be appropriate? Any thoughts about that? Again, no wrong answers here. We're doing a little bit of speculation, but I think there were some reasons there.
Well, the reason that he gave was some people crowded around it, nobody would know where it was.
Okay, very good.
Space around it so everybody can see it.
Right. So back to that 2 million people, right? So if there's a crowd around it, I mean, this is going to be, there's been different ways that the people have been led, right? The pillar of fire by night, the pillar of cloud by day led them in the wilderness. Anything that leads these people has to be out there somewhere, right? I mean, it has to be far enough away. So I had to go look up what 2,000 cubits is. I do not do very well with remembering my biblical measurements, but I looked something up that said a cubit is about 18 inches. And so 2,000 cubits, when you break that down, I had to start doing my conversions, gets you to a little over half a mile, right? So it's out there, you think about what's half a mile from here, it's on out there, right? Maybe down to the next red light or something, maybe for about half a mile. But it's out there far enough that in this mass of people, it can be seen. What are other reasons that they might have needed to stay away from the ark? When you think about staying away from the Ark of the Covenant, what Bible event comes to your mind? Exactly, Dale. So I think about Uzzah, right? So there was Uzzah in 2 Samuel 6, and it says, "And when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error, and he died there beside the ark of God." And if you remember that story, you remember that they were transporting the ark in a way that they were not supposed to. It was, there were the poles that were supposed to be put through the ark. As is happening here, the priests are carrying the ark across the Jordan, and they had made their own decisions about how they were going to transport the ark at that point. And a man named Uzzah did something that he thought was a good thing, right? Because he didn't want the Ark of the Covenant to fall, to crash onto the ground. And he puts his hand up and touches the ark to stay the ark, and he's struck dead. So once again, the power of God here is demonstrated, and there were instructions about how the ark was to be handled. And so yet another reason that the ark being away, a area away from the people, is because of the power there. And there's so many people moving in a direction. If you're a half mile behind it, there's no chance there that people are going to trip and fall, bump into. They're away from the ark. Any other thoughts? Steve.
Smaller one. When you think about the distance here that the ark was in front of them, that just fell
Right.
Because that smaller sea wouldn't have been wide enough for the ark. The ark would have already been on the dry land on the other side by the time the children of Israel started crossing.
Right, exactly. And so that distance there sort of tells you a little bit about what they were trying to cross now. And also, we might talk about this later on, but I'm sure it's part of God's plan that they're not in the middle of a drought when the children of Israel are crossing the Red Sea. There was something, important about the fact that the Jordan was at flood stage. There was to be no doubt that they were not crossing dry land because the river was running dry, and so, this was done at a point in time. It was the harvest season. That meant that the river was at its height and it was at flood stage, and so there was going to be no doubt among the children of Israel, and there was going to be no doubt among those who were going to be their eventual opponents as they went in to conquer Canaan. This was a miraculous thing done by the one true God as he held that river back. It was not going to be because the water level was at an all-time low and they waded across the Jordan. It was at, raging flood stage, and he holds those waters back. So one other thing to think about in this, just this general question about why was the ark far ahead, and that is that it needed to be clearly evident to the people, as in so many cases, who was causing this event to occur. Who's the leader here? This is not a thing done by man, nothing that they should poke their chest out and boast about. The water is being held back and they are being led into the promised land by God. He is leading them. Not even in this case is Joshua out front. It's to be clear and evident that that the leader here and the one who's taking them into the promised land is God. All right. So now that Joshua had announced the way that God planned to lead them across the Jordan, he had a charge for the people. In verse 5, it says, "Then Joshua said to the people, 'Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you.'" So the word consecrate, other translations use the word sanctify. It carries with its idea purification and separation from evil. So what specifically were the people to do in preparation for the next day? So it was one day away, and Joshua told the people, "Go and consecrate," or "Go and sanctify yourselves." So this involves some ritual acts of purification from all that was unclean, from all that would keep an Israelite from coming into the presence of God in the tabernacle. This order about consecration implies not only that the people would see the power of God, but that they would also be in the presence of God. So it just reinforces that whole idea about the ark, that this is the kind of instruction that they would have been given if they were going into the tabernacle. And so once again, think about how important this is. Joshua's telling them, you're about to be in the presence of God. Go prepare yourself. Go consecrate or sanctify yourself. So we're going to talk later on, it might be into next week, a little more about this idea of consecration and what it can mean to us as well. So when the time for the crossing came, Joshua said this to the priests, verse 6, "Take up the Ark of the Covenant and pass on before the people." So they took up the Ark of the Covenant and went before the people. Then in verses 7 and 8, God spoke to Joshua, reaffirming his position as leader of Israel and giving him some further instructions. So what was the purpose of exalting Joshua? Again, he needed encouragement. He needed strength so that Israel would know that God was with him, and they would know that through this great miracle God would perform, not only that he's going to take care of them going across the Jordan, but he's also going to take care of them as they begin what is about to happen on the other side of the Jordan, conquering the promised land. Okay, let's go into the next section here, verses 9 through 13. Any comments before we continue into that next section? Okay. And Joshua said to the people of Israel, "Come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God." And Joshua said, "Here is how you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, and the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is passing over before you into the Jordan. Now therefore take 12 men from the tribes of Israel, from each tribe a man. And when the soles of the feet of the priest bearing the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off from flowing, and the waters coming down from above shall stand in one heap." So rather than attempting to exalt himself before the people, Joshua called for Israel to listen to the words of the Lord your God, as he put it. So he was again showing his leadership skills. It's not all about him. It's about giving credit where credit is due. And he told the people to listen to the words of God. God was with his people, and he was about to lead them across the Jordan River. So we've mentioned this a lot, but it bears mentioning again, that this miraculous event here it had two purposes. Of course, the first purpose was they had to have a way to get into the land of Canaan. But the second is that those people needed to cross over into that land with confidence, realizing that God was with them. And just, as we just read in verse 10, Joshua said, "Here's how you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from among you." And he listed all those people. So this miracle was to help them, to strengthen and encourage them for the fight that was ahead. You know, they were to know that God was with them in this crossing, and he was about to be with them in the battles that they would fight. To show the people God was at work, the priests were commanded to carry the ark into the brink of the water. And then in verse 13, Joshua said, "And when the soles of the feet of the priest bearing the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off from flowing, and the waters coming down from above shall stand in one heap." So, last week we talked about Rahab and the scarlet cord that she was putting in the window, and how that reminded us of an earlier event with the first Passover, the 10th plague, and the people putting the blood on the doorpost so that their house would be passed over, their firstborn would not be killed in that final plague. And so Rahab was to put that scarlet cord in the window to protect her family. And so, here we get into another situation where we see something very similar. It's been mentioned already. I think Steve mentioned the fact of the Israelites crossing the Red Sea. And here we have a very similar event. That crossing of the Red Sea, Exodus 14 says this: "Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left." And so here we are crossing the Jordan in a very similar kind of event we're reading about that is occurring. Now, it's a little different because it's a river. And so as you think about, picturing in your mind what this miracle is all about, what does it say? It says, "When the soles of the feet of the priests bearing the ark of the Lord shall rest in the waters shall be cut off from flowing, and the waters coming down from above shall stand in one heap." So a little different picture maybe than what we see on, the Ten Commandments movie with Charlton Heston, right? Where the Red Sea opens up and there's a wall on each side, as we just read there. But think about the Jordan River, running from the Sea of Galilee up at the top down to the Dead Sea at the bottom. And so you got that river running from the north to the south. And so God, with his hand, holds back that river and the flow stops. And then the dry ground is made, right? So, sort of two components to that, the people are going to be able to walk across on dry ground, but he holds the waters there on that side, and the river stops flowing. And so, a little bit different than the two walls, but still an amazing feat, and it opens up the path for the people to cross over into the promised land. Okay, so let's talk about the crossing itself, verses 14 through 17. So when the people set out from their tents to pass over the Jordan, with the priest bearing the ark of the covenant before the people, and as soon as those bearing the ark had come as far as the Jordan, and the feet of the priest bearing the ark were dipped in the brink of the water, now the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of harvest, the waters coming down from above stood and rose up in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan, and those flowing down toward the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, were completely cut off. And the people passed over opposite Jericho. Now the priest bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firmly on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel was passing over on dry ground until all the nation finished passing over the Jordan. So the crossing of the Jordan occurred just as Joshua had told the people. The priest bore the ark of the Lord. They went out before the people and they stepped into the river. And as soon as that's occurred, according to this record, the waters from above rose up in a heap very far away. So, again, there's a lot of people to cross over here. And it says that this occurred at Adam. So there's some debate about exactly where Adam is. So I did a little bit of reading, but it says, it stopped flowing at Adam, and then, those flowing down toward the Dead Sea were completely cut off. And then it says, and the people passed over opposite Jericho. Now this is probably where I need to have a slide, but maybe if you've got some maps in your Bible and you want to flip to an Old Testament one, if you've got any of those in the back, I'll try to give you a little bit of a description here. So we don't know exactly where Adam was, where the city of Adam was, but some scholars equate Adam with a place called Tel Ed Demia. And they say that was about 18 miles north of Jericho. So once again, think about that idea of very far away. So it says that the people passed over opposite Jericho. So probably on your map you can see the Jordan River, and then just to the west of the Jordan River you can see Jericho. So the waters are stopped, maybe up to 18 miles away, with plenty of room for these people to cross across the Jordan River, not in a single file line, we assume, so that they've got plenty of dry ground to cross. So however it happened and however many miles it was away, we know that the Bible says it was very far, and it gives them several miles to cross. We've mentioned already, and it was in this section, that the Jordan was overflowing its banks. So, you think about situations where maybe the situation around the miracle was made more difficult to show the power of God. Think about Elijah and the prophets of Baal, right? Where, they went through that situation. He told them to dump the buckets of water, build a trench around this altar, so that I can show my power. And then he consumes the whole thing with fire coming down from heaven. So God wanted to make it very clear and wanted to show his power. And so this was done during a time when the waters were at flood stage. God proved himself faithful. And as we read in verse 17, Israel was passing over on dry ground until all the nation finished passing over the Jordan. All right, so we may not make it through all of our applications, but I want to talk about some of them at least. We might be able to make it through all of them in 5 or 6 minutes. So the first one is Joshua's leadership is our first application that we can glean from this, that Joshua exhibited some great leadership qualities for those that want to be leaders and that we should try to reproduce in our lives. So among those qualities, he was an open communicator, but he was authoritative in the things that he said with his people. When he understood the plan, he didn't hesitate to move the people and to tell them what was going on, but he didn't run ahead of God. He allowed God to be the plan maker, and then he followed the plan. He challenged the people to prepare themselves for the Lord's presence, to sanctify, to consecrate themselves. And then after clearly explaining what was about to take place, he let the people do what they were expected to do. So each one of those steps tells us something about being an effective leader and the leadership abilities of Joshua. And because of his great leadership, the nation did as he instructed. Here's the second application, the confidence of Joshua. So Joshua's confidence in God, even before the miraculous crossing of the Jordan River, is significant. As he was talking to the people, he talked about the living God in verse 10. He talked about God being the Lord of all the earth in verse 11. He didn't doubt God in any way or his promises, and he knew that his God was going to be able to deliver and do the things he said, not like the worthless gods that all the pagans worshipped, the idols that they worshipped. The third application is that we always need to appreciate. This applies, so those first two, we look at Joshua and we need to understand and try to model some things that we can learn from Joshua. This third one is that we should always appreciate the power of God. As we read the Bible and we read about miracles, we should take them as a lot more than just interesting stories, exciting stories. We need to always, as we study God's Word, think about His power and His might, and we never need to become so accustomed to God's miraculous power that we sort of take it for granted. So God's ability to stop the Jordan River here and allow those millions of people to cross over on dry land, that needs to tell us about what the power of the one true God. He created all of this. And so it needs to motivate us that we need to yield our will to His will. He needs to be the one that we follow. The last application, and I don't think I can probably make it through all this, is I want to talk to you about this idea of consecration. And I really don't want to spend 3 minutes on this because I think this is sort of a good application. So I think we want to maybe stop here for a minute, and if you got any questions or comments, maybe we can take those for the next couple of minutes. Becky. So 9 through 13, that section we called instruction given. Instruction given. Dale. That's right. Exactly. And so you're right. So, when you think about He stopped the river, that stops the flow, and the water begins to work its way on down. But that ground has to be prepared for all of these people to walk across. And so if you didn't hear what Dale said, God actually did 2 miracles here. Number 1, He stopped the river. Number 2, He prepared the ground, and it was dry for the people to go across. So God definitely made the way for them to be able to accomplish this great goal. When you think about this is the culmination of 40 years. And, for many of them, it was likely not the way that they, certainly, for like Joshua, it's not the way that he necessarily even thought maybe that they would have entered Canaan, right? So you look at your maps And we all know that they wandered around for 40 years because of their lack of faith, because of their disobedience. And so there are much shorter ways for them to have made it into the land of Canaan than wrapping all the way around and coming in from the east to the west across the Jordan River. So, it's just interesting to think about that as well, is that, for those certainly that at least had discussed this maybe with their parents who are now gone on, this is not necessarily the way that they might have imagined that they were going to enter the land, but it gave another great opportunity at this critical point in time for God to show them that He was with them. So we want to put a flag right there. We're going to start next week and talk about in a little more detail this idea of consecration and what it might mean to us as an application. And then we'll move on into Joshua chapter 4 as we talk about the memorial stones and a memorial to God. All right. Thank you very much.